A unified health failure, from multiple metabolic flows to mortality ruptures, a 36-year fluid VMT, solid VMT, and topological interpretation of disease progression, number 1475, VPT Sharp 036, December 22, 2025. Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation. Category: Fluid VMT, Solid VMT, Topology, Metabolic Diseases, Stroke. Mission statement: I write this article not for recognition, but to clarify what I have learned from my own long health suffering and medical research journey. Science does not promise outcomes, but it never betrays cause and consequence. My goal is to extend my own life, and the lives of others by understanding how disease actually moves through time. Introduction. This study does not describe a collection of separate diseases. It is my first attempt to understand multiple medical incidents, driven by complex metabolic disorders, and to describe them as one continuous process. From 1990 to 2025, over the past 36 years, from 43 to 79, my body experienced a long viscoplastic flow, driven by metabolic disorders and lifestyle stressors. Along this flow, several incidents that appeared separate on the surface, but were actually interconnected solid dynamic ruptures emerged as diagnosed diseases. Some were mortal, such as cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease, and finally stroke. Others were severely painful, including neuropathy, that nearly led to amputation, and retinopathy that nearly caused blindness. Although dementia and cancer have not yet appeared as diagnoses, their internal substrates already exist, as disturbed flow patterns, accumulated energy, and time-dependent damage. The fact that they have not been diagnosed yet is a matter of timing, and of my wake-up moment in 2010, when I began strict lifestyle management. This led to partial recovery of internal organ function, while irreversible damage remained at the cellular level. Diseases do not suddenly appear, they emerge when long-prepared conditions cross a threshold. This article presents a unified interpretation using three separate but interconnected lenses: fluid VMT, solid VMT, and topology. Core physics concept: flow versus rupture. In engineering terms, there is a clear distinction between viscoplastic flows and viscoplastic ruptures. For the moment, the distinction between viscoelastic, reversible, and viscoplastic, irreversible, behavior can be set aside. Fluid flow represents slow, time-dependent deformation under sustained stress. Solid structural rupture represents catastrophic failure when accumulated strain exceeds tolerance, which is also time-dependent. Viscosity means that material behavior depends on time. Plasticity means that materials carry permanent damage that is not fully recoverable. From a physics perspective, human organs and cells are therefore viscoplastic systems. In medicine, these two concepts are often confused. Within this framework, metabolic disorders create continuous, viscoplastic flow that evolves across time. Diagnosed diseases represent end-stage, solid dynamic ruptures occurring at certain specific time instants. The years between diagnoses are not periods of normal health, they are periods of silent, viscoplastic creep that have not yet been clinically recognized. Why strain rate matters more than strain. Viscosity does not live in strain. Viscosity lives in strain rate. Strain is accumulated damage. Strain rate is the speed and direction of change. When MDP strain increases, strain rate is positive. When MDP strain decreases or plateaus, strain rate is negative. This sign change is the signature of a viscous biological system. Traditional medicine focuses on levels, such as glucose level, blood pressure level, cholesterol level. Fluid VMT focuses on motion, such as how fast damage is building, how fast it is unloading, and how long each phase lasts. Disease is not a number, it is a motion with memory. The river and harbor analogy. The entire disease history can be understood as a ship on a river. A river carries both fast-flowing and slow-flowing water. Metabolic disorders form the upstream flow. Lifestyle habits and stressors control the flow speed and turbulence. Mortality events are harbors along the river. A harbor can serve as either a temporary stopping point, representing survival, or a permanent stopping point, representing death. Each disease diagnosis is not an endpoint, but a place where accumulated damage becomes visible. However, each mortality disease also carries the potential to end life. At each harbor, the ship either continues moving, meaning survival from one disease, or remains in the harbor permanently, meaning death from that disease. My 5 cardiovascular disease events between from 1994 to 2004 were my first 5 harbors. My chronic kidney disease diagnosis in 2010, along with neuropathy and retinopathy around that period, were separate downstream harbors. My recent pontine hemorrhagic stroke, with a survival rate of only 20% to 30%, was a near-terminal harbor. The distance between harbors and the speed of river flow define the mathematical topology of my metabolic changes, geometric shapes, and the progression of my mortality diseases. Data points connectivity. 4 solid dynamic ruptures in this lifetime history study. 4 major solid dynamic ruptures anchor this mortality disease proxy, MDP, timeline. 1. Around 1994, 2 heart attacks forced me to leave a highly stressful corporate environment and start my own venture, the Avon Semiconductor IC chip design, AI software company, MDP at 200. 2. Around from 1998 to 2001, 3 additional cardiovascular disease events occurred, which eventually forced me to sell Avon. In 2002, this period marked continued macrovascular rupture, MDP at 180 during from 1998 to 1999, and at 200 during from 2000 to 2001. 3. Around 2010, chronic kidney disease, CKD, accompanied by neuropathy and retinopathy, signaled a major microvascular structural failure, MDP at 300. The year 2010 was my first wake-up call, when I began systematic self-study and research in internal medicine and overall health. 4. Around 2025, a near-death stroke represented the most severe solid dynamic rupture to date, MDP at 400. The year 2025 became my second wake-up call, when I fully recognized the limitations of human lifespan and the truly essential elements of life. Each rupture occurred when accumulated viscoplastic strain exceeded structural tolerance. These events are not random, they are mechanically inevitable outcomes of prior fluid flow, fluid VMT between ruptures in this lifetime history study. The periods between ruptures are fluid VMT domains. Even when symptoms were mild or absent, viscoplastic flow continued. This includes vascular stiffening, microvascular obstruction, chronic inflammation, metabolic toxicity. Lifestyle intervention after 2010 did not erase damage, but it slowed flow velocity and reduced further strain rate. That slowing is the only real form of prevention that medicine or biology allows. Topology, geometric shape, and data connectivity. Beyond energy and strain, disease progression has both geometric shapes and data points connectivities. Healthy states form compact, well-connected geometric clusters which are stable. But disease states become elongated, fragmented, poorly connected, and unstable. As metabolic stress increases, data points drift away from stable basins. Connectivity between variables degrades. Recovery pathways disappear. The transition from macrovascular disease to microvascular disease reflects a topological tier, not just severity increase. Even after multiple ruptures, topology can be partially reorganized through discipline control. Role of pattern recognition. My ability to recognize these patterns quickly is not intuition or luck. It is the result of over 600 medical papers grounded in time, spatial, and frequency domains observation and analysis. Over 900 papers based on viscoplastic modeling. Nearly 100 papers based on mathematical topology. By observing geometric and data connectivity patterns, lifetime exposure to evolving data, careful signal observation, and gradual accumulation of experience builds strong pattern recognition capability, which is then repeatedly applied across many research subjects. A single data table already reveals trajectory, curvature, and strain rate direction. Formal computation confirms what shape already suggests. Dementia and cancer as flow problems. Dementia and cancer are not sudden solid structural rupture events. They are long-prepared fluid flow instabilities. Even without diagnosis, internal accumulated damage patterns, contributing to both mortality conditions are already present, including impaired clearance, vascular narrowing, energy accumulation, and loss of adaptive connectivity. Therefore, prevention means managing fluid flow long before structural rupture appears. Conclusion from general viewpoints. This 36-year history is not a sequence of unrelated diseases. It is one continuous viscoplastic process which can be presented via stress-strain diagrams, cumulative VMT energy curves, or topological diagrams. Solid VMT explains where the system failed. Fluid VMT explains how it moved through time to get there. Topology explains how shape and connectivity changed along the way. There is no luck in medicine. Disease diagnosis, survival, and death can all be analyzed and predicted using nature's physics tools. There are only causes and delayed consequences. By understanding strain rate, flow memory, and topology, it is possible to slow irreversible damage process and stretch life forward. Science does not promise survival, but it never lies. Mortality diseases proxy, MDP, as the output strain variable. In this study, mortality disease, proxy, MDP, strain is defined as the output strain. It represents cumulative pathophysiological damage, expressed clinically as mortality-related diseases. MDP strain is not an input stressor. It is the structural consequence of long-term fluid flow. driven by multiple influential forces. My 36-year history is divided into 18 biannual periods, starting in 1990 and ending in 2025. Each period carries a single MDP strain value representing the cumulative damage state. Early periods from 1990 to 2009 show rapid strain accumulation. Later periods from 2010 to 2025 show slower changes due to disciplined lifestyle control. However, the stroke in June 2025 pushed my MDP strain to its highest level of 400. Earlier damage cannot be erased by recent 16 years of lifestyle management, but these efforts have clearly prolonged my biological lifespan. Without such intervention, I would likely have died between 2015 at age 68 and 2017 at age 70. This is not a fortune teller statement, but a conclusion drawn from rigorous scientific observation and analysis. Interpretation based on MDP strain and 5 stressors. This longitudinal table shows that the mortality disease proxy, MDP, strain, is not driven by isolated events, but by the long-term interaction of 5 persistent input stressors: obesity, T2D, vascular load index, VDI, diet, and sleep and stress, S&S. The data are internally consistent and demonstrate a clear strain accumulation, partial unloading, and late-stage structural dominance pattern. From 1990 through the early 2000s, MDP strain increased in parallel with worsening obesity, rapidly rising T2D, excessive diet load, and progressively deteriorating sleep and stress. During this period, VDI rose steadily, indicating continuous accumulation of vascular strain energy. This phase represents disease preparation, where metabolic and lifestyle stressors drove a positive strain rate, long before any terminal events occurred. Between approximately from 2010 to 2017, a major inflection is observed, when I started the implementation of my stringent lifestyle management program. In 2017, I wrote and published my very first medical research paper regarding type 2 diabetes at the WHO IDF-sponsored conference at Dubai, UAE. Since 2018, my obesity, T2D, diet, and S all improved substantially, resulting in a temporary reduction of MDP strain, intensity and no recurrence of other previously happened severe conditions. This confirms that primary metabolic indexes and key lifestyle, behavioral stressors are partially reversible, and that flow-related damage can be slowed or unloaded. However, VDI only showed a modest and transient decline, indicating that underlying vascular structure had already undergone irreversible viscoplastic deformation, particularly the cells of blood vessel walls. After 2017, despite continued improvement and near normalization of my obesity, T2D, diet, and S&S, MDP strain rose again. This late rise is driven almost entirely by VDI, reflecting age-related arterial stiffening and loss of elastic buffering capacity. In this stage, vascular load becomes the dominant stressor, overwhelming improvements in the other 4 inputs. This observation has also demonstrated the importance of monitoring both PP and MAP. The temporal separation between stressor control and disease outbreaks is critical. Stroke and cancer did not emerge during peak metabolic stress, but rather after decades of accumulated MDP strain. Stroke appears as a late structural rupture dominated by vascular fragility, while cancer risk follows the long duration of metabolic and inflammatory strain exposure, even after short-term risk scores decline. In summary, the table accurately demonstrates that MDP strain is a cumulative, viscoplastic process governed by 5 interacting stressors. Early disease is driven by obesity, T2D, diet, and S&S. Late disease is governed primarily by vascular load. Outbreaks such as stroke and cancer are endpoints of long-prepared strain, not sudden failures or short-term relapses. This confirms the validity of using MDP strain and the selected 5 stressors as a unified framework for explaining chronic disease evolution. Years 2002 CVD, 2010 CKD, 2025 stroke were end-stage solid dynamic, viscoplastic ruptures. In between are viscoplastic flows. Furthermore, all of these flows and ruptures can be described by geometric shape, changes and data points connectivities of topology, integrated solid and fluid VMT interpretation with energy contributions. The 36-year VMT energy analysis provides a quantitative explanation of both my long-term health trajectory and my near-death pontine stroke. Solid VMT explains how cumulative damage was built, while fluid VMT explains why rupture occurred when it did. From the solid VMT perspective, type 2 diabetes is the single largest contributor to total accumulated viscoplastic energy, accounting for approximately 26% of the total. Vascular load, represented by VDI derived from pulse pressure, PP, and mean arterial pressure, MAP, contributes about 23%. The remaining 3 stressors, obesity, diet, and sleep and stress, each contribute between 16% and 19%. This distribution is critical. It confirms that my near 4 decades long focus on controlling obesity, and diabetes address the dominant sources of cumulative damage. Without these interventions, total VMT energy would have been substantially higher, and fatal outcomes would likely have occurred much earlier. However, solid VMT alone explains only how damage accumulated, not how failure occurred. Fluid VMT reveals the missing mechanism. During the early and middle decades, elevated T2D, excessive dietary intake, and poor sleep and stress increased metabolic flow intensity, continuously driving energy into vascular tissues. After 2014, these metabolic inflows were markedly reduced, body weight and diabetes were well controlled, diet load was minimized, and recovery processes improved. From a fluid perspective, the inflow side of the system became largely stabilized. Despite this improvement, vascular load continued to rise. The 23% VMT energy contribution from VDI reflects increasing vascular viscosity and resistance caused by long-standing diabetes, related injury, progressive vascular calcification, and aging. In fluid terms, although the inflow rate was reduced, the vascular conduits had become stiff and less compliant. Normal pressure and pulse waves could no longer be adequately absorbed or damped. As a result, PP and MAP became the dominant drivers of vessel wall stress. The pontine stroke therefore represents a late-stage fluid dynamic instability, rather than a metabolic relapse. It occurred along the vascular load axis, when accumulated stiffness and reduced damping caused pressure and pulse energy to concentrate within fragile brain vessels. This explains why the stroke occurred despite excellent long-term control of body weight and diabetes. In summary, the VMT energy percentages validate my long-term strategy of prioritizing obesity and diabetes control for overall survival. At the same time, they reveal a critical blind spot. Insufficient attention to PP and MAP allowed vascular load to continue rising. Solid VMT explains why cumulative damage was unavoidable, while fluid VMT explains why and when the final rupture occurred. TDA analysis of MDP strain using 5 stressors. At first, I should clarify that topology here means geometric connectivity of health variables, not abstract mathematics. Topological data analysis, TDA, was applied to the MDP 36 years dataset by embedding each biannual period as a point in a 5-dimensional stress space defined by body weight, BW, type 2 diabetes, T2D, vascular load index, VDI, diet, and sleep and stress, S&S. MDP output was treated as an output strain indicator and not included in the coordinate space. The objective was to examine the geometric structure of long-term stress evolution and its relationship to disease rupture. The resulting point cloud forms 3 distinct geometric regions, connected by a continuous trajectory rather than random scatter. From 1990 to 2003, points cluster tightly in a region characterized by high T2D, excessive diet load, worsening sleep and stress, rising BW, and steadily increasing VDI. This dense cluster represents a prolonged metabolic overload state with sustained positive strain rate. Major cardiovascular events occurred within this region, consistent with long residence in a harmful stress geometry. From 2004 to 2013, the trajectory exits the early cluster through a transition corridor. During this phase, T2D and diet begin to decline, sleep and stress stabilize, and BW peaks and then improves, while VDI continues to rise and reaches a local maximum. This corridor reflects partial stress unloading with delayed structural response, and coincides with the emergence of microvascular complications, such as CKD, neuropathy, and retinopathy. After 2014, the system enters a second stable cluster where BW, T2D, diet, and sleep and stress are all well controlled. However, from 2012 to 2013, VDI separates progressively from the other 4 dimensions, and climbs from 1.51 VDI rises to its highest level of 1.61 VDI from 2024 to 2025. Topologically, this produces a stretched cluster dominated by the vascular axis. This geometric shift explains why MDP output rises again, despite excellent metabolic control, and why stroke appears as a late structural rupture, driven by vascular fragility rather than metabolic relapse. Through VPT, combining viscoplasticity and topology, I finally understood why I had a stroke in 2025. Although my body weight and type 2 diabetes were well controlled after 2014, the cumulative mechanical stress on my blood vessels continued to increase, because earlier diabetes had already damaged and calcified the arteries, and aging further reduced their ability to absorb pressure and pulse energy. This is why monitoring both pulse pressure, PP, and mean arterial pressure, MAP, in addition to systolic pressure, diastolic pressure, and pulse rate, is essential. In summary, TDA reveals a continuous disease flow through connected geometric states, early metabolic overload, transitional damage expression, and late vascular dominance. Stroke represents a late-stage endpoint along the vascular load axis, where arterial stiffness and cumulative pressure stress dominate the topology, despite controlled metabolic factors. Conclusion: this 36-year journey reveals that sickness is the fluid dynamics of risk, while diagnosis is the solid dynamics of failure. Through viscoplastopology, we observed that the 2010 CKD rupture was more complex than the 2002 CVD rupture, because of the loss of geometric connectivity. However, the post-2011 data shows that even a system with multiple plastic ruptures can be topologically reorganized back into a state of homeostatic robustness through precise metabolic engineering, for example a stringent and effective lifestyle management program. I should emphasize once more that survival was probabilistic, not guaranteed. I have reduced my disease energy and its strain rate, but I did not and could not eliminate my risk. This is the essence of preventive medicine. Disclaimer: this content is provided for educational reference only, and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.